Saren Vane had lived in the borderlands long enough to know that fate was something other people believed in. She believed in her hands, in the herbs she dried on the wooden rack above her clinic window, in the way a wound looked when it was healing versus when it was lying to you. She believed in things she could measure, touch, and fix. Everything else, destiny, bonds, the great howling hunger of the moon, belonged to the kind of story told by people who had never had to build their own life from the ground up. So when the bonding moon ceremony arrived that October, she attended the way she attended most obligations. Quietly, without expectation, ready to leave. The hall was enormous. Hundreds of wolves filled it, dressed in ceremonial gray, breathing the same charged air. Saren stood near the back. She wore no gray, just a dark jacket, and the kind of expression that says, "I am present, and that is all you are getting from me." She felt him before she saw him. Not dramatically, not like lightning. More like pressure, a change in the room, the way a storm changes the air before a single drop has fallen. Around her, wolves went still. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, and then the doors at the far end of the hall opened, and Caius Draven walked in. He was tall. He moved the way people move when they have never once questioned whether they belonged in a room. His face was serious in the way that meant it had always been serious. He was surrounded by guards, advisors, people whose entire purpose was to orbit him, and he looked through all of them like they were glass. His eyes found hers. Not searching, not scanning the crowd and pausing on her by chance. Found, direct, certain. Inside Saren, something went absolutely still. Her wolf, the part of her she kept quiet and governed and firmly in its place, stopped moving entirely. The way animals stop moving when something vast and old passes through the dark nearby. She felt the bond form the way you feel a door close in a house you thought was empty. Quiet, final, completely unexpected. He crossed the room. The crowd parted. Nobody spoke. He stopped in front of her, in a hall of hundreds, and looked at her the way people look at something they hadn't planned on needing, something that arrived without warning and rearranged everything. He didn't speak, he just looked. And Saren Vane, who believed in her hands and her herbs and nothing she couldn't measure, felt the pull so strongly that she had to press her feet into the floor to stay still. She let 2 seconds pass. Then she said, "I decline." 2 words, no trembling, no apology. She turned and walked out of the hall, through the doors, across the stone courtyard, and back toward the borderlands. She did not run. She did not look back. Her hands were steady, and her face was composed, and something inside her chest was making a sound she refused to listen to. Behind her, a witness would later say, the Alpha King stood completely motionless for a very long time, and his wolf made a sound no one in that hall had ever heard an alpha make before. Not a growl, not aggression, something older and quieter and far more difficult to name. The 5 years that followed were hers. She built her clinic properly, expanded the back room, added a second examination table, trained 2 young wolves from the nearest border village who had good instincts and steady hands. She grew her herb garden until it took up the entire south wall. She learned which families in the borderlands had trouble getting to the Iron Veil healers and made sure they never had to make that journey. She did not regret what she had done. She told herself this every morning, the way people repeat true things that still need repeating. She did not think about him, except on the nights when she couldn't sleep and the house was too quiet and the moon was too bright. On those nights, she would make tea and sit at the kitchen table and look at nothing in particular, and then, eventually, go back to bed. She heard things, of course. Word travels in wolf territories the way water travels. It finds every crack. She heard that the Alpha King had not taken another mate. She heard that he had grown quieter, more precise, more difficult to read at the negotiating table. She heard that the border wolves reported howling from inside the palace walls some nights. Late, formless, repeated. She told herself she heard none of this. And then she started dreaming about it. The howling in the dreams had no words, but it had shape. It curved in a way that felt like her name. She would wake up with her hand pressed flat against her sternum, and her wolf pacing in slow, tight circles that took a long time to stop. She made tea on those mornings too. Sometimes she made it 3 times before she remembered she had already made it. She did not tell anyone about the dreams. The rogue wolves came on a Tuesday. 6 of them, not organized, hungry, displaced, looking for something to take. They came through the eastern edge of her territory at midday, when 2 of her patients were still in the clinic, and her youngest assistant, barely 20 years old, was in the garden. Saren sent her patients out the back. She told her assistant to go with them and not to stop. Then she stood in the doorway of her clinic, because she had built this place and she did not have the gear for running. The Iron Veil patrol arrived 11 minutes later. Fast, too coordinated to be accidental. And at the center of the patrol, on a dark horse, was a man she had not stood close to in 5 years. He was different in small ways, sharper around the eyes, a scar along his jaw that hadn't been there before. But he moved exactly the same, like someone who had never once questioned whether he belonged somewhere. He dismounted. His guards handled the rogue wolves efficiently. He walked toward her clinic as if he had simply been on his way here all along. He stopped a few feet away. He looked at her. "You didn't have to come yourself," Saren said. She meant for it to land as a dismissal, a statement of fact. He let a silence pass, the kind of silence that isn't empty, that has things living in it, and then said, "My wolf wouldn't let me not." He said it simply, not dramatically, the way you report something true that you have stopped arguing with. Saren held the doorframe. Her wolf surged toward him with a force that surprised her. 5 years of careful distance collapsing into one afternoon like it had never existed. She held herself still by pure habit. She gripped the wood under her hands. She said, "You should leave." He nodded once. He left. His patrol rode away through the eastern trees. And from somewhere far off, from a direction she was not looking, she heard it. Low. Continuous. Shaped like something she had been refusing to name. She stood in her doorway for a long time after the sound was gone. Her oldest friend, Mira, arrived 3 days later. She had been at the bonding moon ceremony 5 years ago. She had watched Saren walk out. She had said nothing then, and very little since. She sat down at Saren's kitchen table, accepted a mug of tea, and waited. Saren talked for 2 hours about her clinic, about the rogue wolves, about the patrol response time, about whether she should reinforce the eastern boundary fence. Mira kept waiting. Eventually, the kitchen went very quiet, and Saren looked down at her mug and said, "I could feel the bond when I rejected him. I felt it the entire time." Mira said nothing. "I knew exactly what he was to me. I knew before he crossed the room." Saren's voice stayed even. "I still said no." "Why?" It took a long time to answer. Not because she didn't know, because she had never said it out loud, and saying a thing out loud gives it a different kind of weight. "Because an Omega from the borderlands becoming queen ends one of 2 ways," she finally said. "Either I disappear into what he needs me to be, or I hold on so hard to what I am that it breaks both of us. I had watched it happen to other people. I did not want to become someone I couldn't recognize." Mira looked at her carefully. "And now? And now I dream about the howling." The kitchen was quiet for a long time. Then Mira said, "He heard what you didn't say, you know. Whatever you were feeling when you walked out, he heard it. His wolf has been answering it for 5 years." Saren put her mug down on the table. She did not pick it up again. She crossed into Iron Veil territory at dawn, on foot, without telling anyone where she was going. She had not planned what to say. She had tried, had started sentences in her head on the long walk, found them wrong, started again, found those wrong too. Eventually she stopped trying and just walked. Through the pale morning light, through the trees that marked the boundary between her world and his. By the time the palace came into view, she had 17 different versions of this conversation, and no use for any of them. The gate was tall and iron, and entirely unwelcoming. She stopped in front of it. He was already there. Standing just inside the gate, alone, no guards, no advisors, no one orbiting him. He was in plain clothes. He looked like someone who had not slept well in a long time but had stopped being surprised by it. His wolf, she noticed, was completely still, not tense, not pacing, just watching, holding very carefully. She stood on her side of the gate. He stood on his. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she started talking, and it came out badly, out of order, the wrong words before the right ones. She told him that she had been hearing his wolf in her sleep for years, and had not admitted this until she couldn't stop admitting it. She told him she had said no because she had been afraid, not of him, but of losing the shape of herself inside something that big. She told him she had built her clinic and her practice and her life, and none of it felt wrong, and she still wasn't sure she could be a queen without becoming someone she didn't recognize. She told him she was still afraid. Then she stopped talking. The morning was very quiet. "Are you here?" he said. Not sarcastically. He meant it as a real question. "Are you here, standing in front of me, after 5 years?" "Yes," she said. He opened the gate. He crossed the distance between them, slowly, without pressure, and when he was close enough that she could see the careful way he was holding himself, keeping everything steady, not reaching, just present, something in her chest unlocked with a quietness that surprised her. His wolf made the sound again. She had heard it from a distance twice before, in the ceremony, from across the trees after the rogue wolves. Up close, it was different. Not loud, more like a deep, slow exhale, like something that had been waiting without knowing how long it had been waiting, and had finally, simply, stopped. She understood it now. She had been wrong about what it was. For 5 years, she had been afraid it was a demand, a wolf saying, "Come back, you owe me this." But standing there, close enough to feel the warmth of him, she heard it for what it actually was. Recognition, the oldest, simplest sound. There you are, finally. Again, she did not give up the clinic. This was the first thing she said when they sat down together that morning in a small room off the main hall, 2 mugs of tea between them, no ceremony. She said, "The clinic stays open. I train the people I'm training. I go to the borderlands when I need to. This is not something I am asking about." He said, "I know." Just that. 2 words, before she had even finished. She looked at him. He looked back. She filed that moment very carefully. What came after was slow, not dramatic, not a sudden rushing together of 2 people who had been apart too long. It was more like 2 solid things learning how to stand beside each other, without either one becoming the other's wall. They talked for a long time that morning, about the bond, about the 5 years, about what she needed, and what he had understood, and what he had gotten wrong. He listened the way people listen, when they are actually trying to understand, not waiting for a pause to respond. She didn't agree with everything he said. She told him that. He didn't seem to need her to. 3 weeks later, she was spending half her time at the palace and half in the borderlands, and both places felt like places she was allowed to be. Her wolf had stopped its slow nighttime circling. It moved differently now, settled, calm, like a thing that had finally put something down it had been carrying for too long. One evening, she stood at a window that looked toward the borderlands, watching the tree line in the late light. Caius came and stood beside her, not close enough to crowd, just present. The way he had learned to be present, near without pressure, there without demanding anything from the being there. Neither of them spoke. The howling had been quiet for 3 weeks. She hadn't told him she noticed. He hadn't told her he knew. Outside, the trees were dark and still. The moon was coming up behind them, pale and enormous, the same moon that had been above that ceremony hall 5 years ago. She looked at it without the old tightening in her chest, without the old careful grief of someone who had chosen wisely and paid for it quietly. Her hand rested on the windowsill. His hand rested near it, not touching, nearly. The borderlands were 2 hours away. Her patients were there, her herb garden, her assistants with their good instincts and steady hands, her whole built life, intact, exactly as she had made it. And here was this too, this quiet, this man who had stood at a gate at dawn without being told she was coming, this wolf that had answered her silence for 5 years, not because it was owed something, but because it simply knew where she was and could not pretend otherwise. She had spent a long time being afraid of what the bond would cost her. She had not thought to ask what it might give back. The moon came fully above the trees. The room was very still. Somewhere outside, very faintly, the night made a sound, not howling, something quieter than that. Something that had finally, after a long time, learned how to rest. Saren stayed at the window a little longer. Then she turned away from it, back into the room, back into the life she was still, carefully, building. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was, she thought, exactly the right size.